She felt the rough hand of her manager clutch her hair, yanking hard under the gaze of more than 50 diners. Her scalp burned. Her breath caught in her throat, and the laughter from a nearby table broke awkwardly in the suffocating air. She felt small, stripped bare, and humiliated beyond words. Then, at table 7, where the light glinted off a tailored gray suit, a man rose to his feet. His voice was low, cold, yet carried an undeniable authority. Let her go. Now. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. Those 4 words struck like a command. The entire restaurant fell silent. What Emily Carter didn't know was that the man who had just come to her defense, Nathan Morello, had once sworn never to involve himself in violence again. And in that very moment, when he stood up for her, he had already stepped back into the darkness he had spent years trying to escape. That night, Verona House shimmered like a stage set for elegance, candlelight dancing over crimson wine. The soft hum of jazz, mingling with the clink of silverware and the rich aroma of seared steak. Emily had been running from table to table for 2 straight hours. Sweat gathering beneath her white shirt. She'd worked here for 8 months. Long enough to know that one small mistake could cost her more than her pride, because Kyle Mercer, the restaurant manager, never hesitated to humiliate anyone in front of customers. When the glass of Pinot Noir slipped from her tray and spilled across the beige evening gown of a VIP guest, time itself seemed to freeze. She opened her mouth to apologize, but Kyle was already storming toward her, his face flushed red, his voice slicing through the music. "You just cost this restaurant $700. You idiot!" And before Emily could react, his hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of her hair and jerking her down like a child being scolded. Gasps filled the room. Chairs scraped against the floor. And then, silence. A man stood up. Nathan Morello, table 7. His steel-gray eyes locked on Kyle's. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke, slow and deliberate. "Let her go. If you want to keep that hand of yours." The sound of his voice froze the entire room. Kyle looked up, ready to argue. But something in Nathan's gaze made him step back and release his grip. Emily stumbled, nearly falling. But Nathan's hand caught her shoulder firm, yet gentle. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and slightly hoarse. She couldn't speak. She only nodded. The man paid his bill, left without another word, and placed a single business card neatly on the counter. When Emily picked it up, it read, "Nathan Morello. Morello Holdings." Behind her, someone whispered, "Morello, isn't that the name of the mafia boss who used to rule Chicago?" As the room slowly returned to its polished order, Emily stood motionless in the middle of the floor, her hair disheveled, her heart pounding. She had just been rescued, and every instinct told her this was not merely an act of kindness. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling softly over Michigan Avenue. Nathan sat in his black car, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. He had promised himself never to get involved in violence again, that the name Morello would remain nothing but a relic of his past. But when he saw that man yank the young woman's hair in front of everyone, he couldn't stay seated, under the streetlights. He looked at the spare business card he had given her, his sigh fading into the mist. He knew that once she reached out, everything would begin to change for both of them. That night, back in her small rented room in South Chicago, Emily placed the card on the table and stared at it for a long time. A stranger, a single act that seemed accidental, and yet it shook her world to its core. She didn't know it then, but the red wine that spilled tonight would ignite a fire that would burn longer than a lifetime, a fire named love, redemption, and destiny. Before we go any further, if you too felt your heart flutter when Nathan Morello stood up in the crowd to defend Emily, then subscribe to Underworld Love Stories to hear more emotional, dramatic, and surprising love stories like this every day. Hit like if you believe that sometimes a single moment of courage can change a person's life. And I want to know, where are you listening to this story? Comment with your city or country so we know where in the world the journey of Underworld Love Stories has touched your heart. Now, let's go back to Chicago, where Emily Carter is about to face a man named Morello, and fate begins to weave its thread. The next morning, Chicago lay beneath a thin veil of mist. sunlight glinting weakly through the glass towers. Emily Carter stepped into Verona House with dark circles under her eyes. Having not slept a single hour, she still couldn't believe what had happened the night before. The image of Kyle Mercer yanking her hair, the murmurs from the tables, and the man at table 7, Nathan Morello, standing up amid the crowd like a sudden gust of wind, kept replaying in her mind like a blurred reel of film. But this morning, the restaurant no longer looked the same. A notice was taped to the front door, temporarily closed for management restructuring. The staff huddled in small groups, faces pale and uneasy, their whispers trembling. "You haven't heard?" a waitress murmured. "After what happened last night, Kyle was fired. Verona House has a new owner." Emily froze. "A new owner?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Who bought it?" The answer came from behind her. "Morello Holdings." The 3 words hung in the air, heavy and still. Someone dropped a tray, the metallic clang echoing across the floor. Silence followed. A chill crept down Emily's spine. Morello, the name, conjured up old newspaper clippings. Stories of the Italian mafia that once ruled Chicago 2 decades ago. She had always thought of them as urban legends. And now that legend had taken over the place where she worked. The office door opened, and a legal representative stepped out, announcing curtly, "As of today, Verona House is officially under the ownership of Mr. 1, Nathan Morello. All employees are to take a 3-day leave until further notice." Emily took a step back, dizzy with confusion and unease. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or afraid. The man who had defended her the night before was now the new master of the small world she clung to. When the crowd dispersed, she remained alone in the empty dining room, where the crystal glasses still caught faint shards of morning light. On the counter lay a white envelope, neatly placed, her name written across it in careful handwriting. Inside was the same business card she had held the night before, along with a line written in blue ink: "If you still wish to work, meet me at 10 a.m. tomorrow at the cafe on Monroe Street." Below it was the signature Nathan Morello. Her heartbeat quickened. Part fear, part curiosity. She looked around. Everything felt quieter than ever. Only the faint scent of red wine lingered on the floor. The last trace of that fateful night. That afternoon, Emily sat in her small 3rd-floor apartment in South Loop, staring out at the line of cars crawling beneath the gray sky. Her mother had once told her, "Never let anyone make you feel small, not even if they're the ones paying you." But last night, she had done nothing but tremble and bow her head. Now, someone had stood up for her, but that man bore the name Morello. She didn't know whether to trust in kindness or brace herself against danger. She picked up her phone and typed Nathan Morello into the search bar. Dozens of headlines appeared. Only son of the late mafia boss Vincent Morello, key witness in the 2012 financial case, vanished from the business world after his father's death. Emily swallowed hard. She remembered his eyes from the night before, calm, yet filled with something that seemed to be fighting itself. She turned off the screen, leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling streaked with pale light. Part of her wanted to forget, to walk away, to find another job and live quietly. But another part deeper, quiet terre, impossible to explain, wanted to understand why a man like him had stood up for her, and why he now wanted to see her alone. The next morning, she dressed in a simple dress, tied her hair neatly, her heart pounding with each beat. Outside, the snow was melting, the sky turning clear. She knew she was stepping into something she couldn't predict. Yet she also knew there are moments in life that, if you don't seize them, you'll regret forever. Emily slipped on her coat, took the business card, and stepped out the door. At the corner of Monroe Street, a small cafe awaited, and with it, the man who had silenced an entire restaurant with a single sentence. That morning, the cafe on Monroe Street was bathed in a warm winter light streaming through the window panes. Emily Carter stood outside, clutching the strap of her bag, her heart fluttering with unease. She had arrived 15 minutes early, partly out of politeness, partly because she couldn't bear the thought of keeping a man named Morello waiting. When she stepped inside, the scent of roasted coffee mingled with the sweetness of baked pastries, making her throat go dry. In the far corner near the window, Nathan Morello sat alone. He wore a crisp white shirt beneath a black wool coat, the top button undone, a look that was both composed and effortlessly relaxed. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod, gesturing for her to come over. Emily took a deep breath and walked toward him, sitting down across the table. His voice, low and steady, carried a gentleness as if he were afraid of intimidating her. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded and answered softly. "I should be the one thanking you for last night." He shook his head, his gaze free of any trace of pride. "No need for thanks. I just can't stand seeing someone humiliated while everyone else looks away." Nathan paused for a moment, then added quietly, "My mother used to be a waitress. She was treated badly exactly like that. Maybe I saw her in you." "I was." Emily looked up. I startled. The light caught his eyes, weary, yet sincere. "Is she still alive?" she asked gently. Nathan turned toward the window, where the snow was melting on the rooftops. "No. She died when I was 20, before I ever had the chance to make her proud of me." The sentence was brief, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. Emily said nothing. Something inside her tightened. There was a gravity in him that didn't belong to the businessmen she'd met before. No boasting, no pretense, only a quiet sorrow etched deep as time. The waiter brought over their coffees. Nathan gave a polite nod of thanks, then pushed a small espresso cup toward her. "I figured you prefer a medium roast," he said, almost teasingly. She blinked in surprise. "I never mentioned that." He smiled faintly. "I observed it. People who aren't used to pretending don't order cappuccino in a crowded restaurant. You chose espresso. It's quick, efficient, easy to control." She smiled, easing into the moment without realizing it. "So you observe people that closely?" "Do you?" she said playfully, then fell silent when she saw he wasn't laughing. Nathan set his cup down, his hands clasped loosely together. "I bought Verona House," he said simply. "Not just because of you, but because I want to turn it into something different. A place where no one gets humiliated just because someone else holds the power." "A bradery." Emily looked up, her eyes uncertain. "You want me to go back there? To work?" He nodded. "Not as a waitress. I need someone who can see people, not just the food they serve." "You have that instinct." She let out a small laugh, in part disbelief, part wonder. "I'm just a girl who carries wine trays." "Mr. Morello, you're overestimating me." His reply came slow but firm. "I never say what I don't believe." In that instant, the silence between them lost its tension. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pastries through the open door, and the soft jingle of a bell mixed with the murmured voices of strangers. Emily felt her heart beating faster, not out of fear, but because something warm and unfamiliar was stirring beneath her doubts. Nathan reached into his coat and laid a single sheet of paper on the table. "This is a temporary contract," he said. "You'll help me rebuild Verona House, the staff, the system, the spirit of the place. Triple the pay, and 1% equity." She looked down at the paper, then back at him. "Why me?" His gaze held hers. "Because you don't pretend, Emily. And in a world full of performances, that's the rarest thing of all." His words awakened something in her, something long dormant, something that felt like belief. She didn't sign then and there, but she didn't refuse either. When she rose to leave, she glanced back once. Nathan was still seated by the window, the sunlight tracing his face bright, yet shadowed. Outside, the Chicago sky was clearer than it had been in days, and inside her, a question began to take shape. Had this man saved her from humiliation, or had he unknowingly led her into a world far more dangerous than she could ever imagine? That evening, Emily Carter sat alone in her small apartment. The contract from Nathan Morello spread out before her, the fine white paper reflecting the soft amber glow of the lamp. She had read it over and over, searching for something hidden between the lines. 3 times her current pay, a 6-month term, full decision-making authority, and one final note written in blue ink: "You'll be my equal, not my employee." That line unsettled her the most. Equal. A word so simple. Yet could it truly exist in the world of men like Nathan? She closed her eyes and thought of that morning at the cafe, his calm gaze. The low rasp of his voice when he spoke of his mother. Nothing in him had felt rehearsed. Still, part of her hesitated to trust. Yet as she looked around the cramped apartment, hearing the wind slip through the cracks in the window frame, she knew she couldn't go on living in fear. Perhaps this was the rare chance life was offering her, or a door opening into something darker, but either way, she had to walk through it. The next day, Emily arrived at the Morello Holdings building, a name that alone made her chest tighten. The office was on the 17th floor, its glass walls offering a sweeping view of Chicago. Nathan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, the light tracing a faint halo along his shoulders. When she entered, he turned, his eyes gentler than she expected. "I didn't think you'd come this soon," he said. "I don't like keeping people waiting," she replied, steadying her voice. He nodded slightly and motioned for her to sit. A cup of coffee steamed in the center of the table, its familiar scent calming her just enough to breathe evenly again. "I want you to understand something," Nathan began, his voice low, deliberate. "This isn't an ordinary job. Verona House was a place my mother and I used to go when I was a boy. I bought it back not just as an investment, but as a way to make amends. I want it to be a place where women like her, like you, never have to bow their heads again. As that is Bada." Emily looked at him and saw in his steel-gray eyes a strange kind of light, not power, but the glimmer of someone who had lost something long ago and was still fighting to reclaim it. "You really think I can do that?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. Without hesitation, "I'm not hiring you for your resume. I chose you because of the integrity I saw in you that night, the way you stood up, even when the entire room was staring." "It's brusque." She stayed silent for a long moment, then drew a deep breath and picked up the pen. The sound of its tip against paper landed like a quiet seal on fate. When she set it down, Nathan tilted his head slightly, his gaze softening. "Good. From now on, we're partners." He extended his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was warm, his grip firm yet gentle enough to send a tremor through her chest. "One more thing," he said as she started to rise. "You'll have full authority over hiring and retraining the staff. But if you ever need me, just call." "Do you really believe I won't mess everything up?" she asked, half teasing, half uncertain. Nathan's reply was quiet but unyielding. "If I didn't believe in you, I wouldn't have brought you into my world." Those last words stopped her cold. His world. The phrase sounded both inviting and dangerous. She left the office, her thoughts a tangled rush of emotions. As the elevator doors closed, she caught a glimpse of Nathan still standing by the window, coffee cup in hand, gazing down at the city like a man waging war against his own memories. Outside, Chicago burned with the red glow of sunset, the light reflecting off the skyscrapers in streaks like slow-moving fire. Emily clutched her bag and stepped into the cold wind that lashed her face. She knew that from the moment her pen touched the paper, her life would never be the same. Yet beneath the fear and the uncertainty, something else stirred, a fragile spark of trust, an unspoken promise. And though reason urged her to be cautious, her heart whispered just one truth. Perhaps, for the first time, she had found someone who truly saw her in a world built on pretense. 3 days later, Verona House opened its doors once more. Morning light streamed through the tall glass panels, glinting off the empty rows of tables and the new white curtains that had just been hung. The faint smell of fresh paint mingled with the scent of polished wood from the bar, filling the air with something both clean and unfamiliar, the kind of stillness that comes before a new beginning. Emily Carter stepped inside, holding a folder of recruitment papers she had stayed up late the night before to finish. Nathan Morello stood in the middle of the dining room, his white shirt sleeves rolled up as he worked with a carpenter to adjust the new sign. The sight stopped her for a moment. There was no trace of the immaculate suit or distant composure. He looked like an ordinary man, someone trying to rebuild from the ground up. When he noticed her, Nathan smiled, a brief, quiet smile. "Right on time," he said, his familiar, low voice carrying warmth. She answered. I didn't want to keep my new partner waiting. I want to. He nodded and motioned for her to follow him into the kitchen, a bright space gleaming with new pans, knives, and trays neatly arranged on stainless counters. I want you to look over the equipment list and the new procedures before we reopen, he said. We're going to do things differently, not just the menu, but how people are treated here. Emily looked around and nodded slightly. We, she repeated, putting gentle emphasis on the word, as if to test whether he truly saw her as a partner or just an employee. Nathan met her gaze. I told you before, you're my partner. I want you to teach them something I never learned. Respect. The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. In the world of power and hierarchy, humility like that was rare. They spent the morning checking every detail, from the arrangement of the tables to the greeting protocol at the door. Emily suggested abolishing the supervisor position that thrived on yelling, replacing it with a rotating team leader each week so that everyone could learn to listen to one another. Nathan listened carefully, jotting notes without interrupting. Occasionally, his eyes lingered on her a little longer than necessary, as though he wanted to say something but wasn't ready to. By noon, they sat in a corner of the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the steady hum of the oven. Emily spread out her notebook, pointing to the last page. I think Verona House should start by changing how people feel when they walk in, not just what they eat. A dinner doesn't need to be perfect, but it should have a soul. Nathan looked at her and nodded slowly. You sound just like my mother. She used to say food is only an excuse, a reason for people to find one another. His voice softened on those last words, as if brushing against a memory that still hurt, and his eyes carried a tenderness that surprised her. Emily sat still, realizing she was seeing a side of him no one else had, not the Morello name that inspired fear, but the man himself. As they walked together into the main dining room, the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows, casting their shadows across the floor. He stopped and said quietly, If you see something that doesn't feel right, tell me. I'm not good with people, but I want to learn. She turned toward him, her tone gentler than usual. And I'm not good at trusting, but I'll try. Today. Her words drew a rare smile from him, the kind that melted the coolness he usually wore like armor. When she left the restaurant that evening, the city of Chicago had already lit up, its reflection shimmering across the lake. Emily paused by the glass door, looking up at the new sign, Verona House glowing softly beneath the golden light. And just below it, a handwritten slogan Nathan had chalked in himself, built not to impress, but to heal. Is another inticide? She smiled and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, fear no longer filled every corner of her heart, perhaps among the fresh paint, the new bricks, and the people starting over. She too was being reborn alongside the man who had once silenced an entire restaurant with a single sentence. That night, long after everyone had left Verona House, the lights in the kitchen still glowed. Emily Carter sat at the bar, flipping through her notebook, listening to the steady ticking of the wall clock. She was about to leave when she heard slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hallway. Nathan Morello appeared, his sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, a small paper bag of ingredients in his hand. He no longer looked like the composed businessman she had met, but like a chef preparing something private, something personal. I figured you haven't had dinner, he said, setting the bag down. I usually don't eat after 9, she replied with a faint smile. But I'm guessing you're the kind of man who can't sleep without cooking something first, Iteper said. Nathan looked at her, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes before a quiet laugh escaped him. You're observant. I've had this habit since I was a kid. When I cook, I feel at peace, Iteper said. He took out a few strands of spaghetti, a wedge of pecorino cheese, black pepper, and a bit of butter. Cacio e pepe, he said. Simple, quick, but it never fails. The smell of melting butter filled the kitchen, mingling with the soft spice of toasted pepper, wrapping the quiet space in a warmth that felt almost like memory. Emily leaned against the counter, resting her chin in her hand, watching him move with practiced ease. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked. Nathan didn't look up. His voice was calm, steady. "My grandmother taught me. She used to run a small trattoria in Italy. When I was little, she'd say, 'Cooking is how you love without words.'" I laughed back then, thought she was being sentimental. Now I understand. Wise. He placed the plate in front of her, sprinkled a light dusting of cheese on top, and slid it across the counter. "Try it." Emily twirled a forkful of pasta. The aroma of pepper blending with the rich cheese and the warmth of butter. Her senses came alive. "It's wonderful," she said softly. With certainty, Nathan sat across from her, the golden light casting a softer tone over the sharp lines of his face. "I've always thought cooking and rebuilding people aren't that different," he said. "Both take patience, intuition, and a bit of courage to start over." To this, Emily looked up, her eyes meeting his. "So that's what you're doing then? Starting over?" Nathan was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I've spent half my life running from the name Morello, but I realized that unless I face it, I'll never truly be free." His voice grew quieter. "My mother died never knowing I'd left that darkness behind. I want Verona House to be a place she could be proud of, even if only in memory." "Sears," Emily set down her fork, her chest tightening. "Do you think she'd forgive you?" she asked softly. Nathan met her eyes, his gaze warmer than she had ever seen it. "I don't know. But maybe she'd understand. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's believing that people can change." And it stirred. In that moment, the space between them no longer felt like that of an employer and an employee, or even two wounded lives trying to rebuild. It was simply two souls, adrift in the same quiet room, both searching for a way out of the past. Emily smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who's studied philosophy," Nathan answered, half serious, half amused. "Maybe I've just lost enough to know that money can't buy peace." "It is." Silence settled between them again, gentle, unforced. Only the soft clink of silverware and the sigh of wind through the trees outside broke it. When the clock struck 11, Emily rose to leave. "Thank you for dinner," she said, reaching for her coat. "And thank you for not seeing me as just the woman who spilled the wine." "It is," Nathan smiled, his eyes carrying something unspoken. "I see you for who you are. You don't have to be perfect to have worth." Read it. She turned to go, but her heart stumbled over a sudden, quickened beat. Outside, snow drifted in small, golden flakes under the streetlights. As Emily stepped out the door, she glanced back. Nathan was still standing in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, his gaze lost in the rising steam from the pot. The scene was strangely peaceful, as if time itself had slowed to breathe. And in that moment, Emily realized that perhaps it wasn't only Verona House being rebuilt. Perhaps she, too, after years of fear and quiet endurance, was being rekindled, piece by piece, by something as simple and human as a bowl of pasta shared in the warmth of night. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of Verona House, glinting off the polished stainless steel counters. The air buzzed with quiet energy. New staff members were testing appetizer recipes, while Emily Carter stood in the middle of the kitchen, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on a simmering pan. She had grown used to leading the team, though she still preferred to work alongside everyone rather than simply observe from afar. Nathan Morello walked in, sleeves rolled up, his tie draped loosely over one shoulder. He smiled at the sight of her teaching one of the cooks how to season a sauce. "You don't have to do everything yourself," he said, his tone caught between sternness and fondness. Emily turned around, a few strands of hair sticking to her temple. "I can't tell someone they're doing it right if I haven't done it myself." Too. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful, as if something unspoken crossed his mind. Then he stepped closer, resting his hand on the edge of the counter, watching her stir. "Careful," he said quietly. "The sauce is boiling too hard." Too. No sooner had he spoken than a droplet of oil snapped up from the pan, landing on the back of her hand. Emily flinched. Dropping the spoon with a metallic clang, she winced, pulling her hand back instinctively. "Let me see." Nathan said quickly, catching her wrist before she could protest. The burn glowed red against her pale skin. He guided her toward the sink, turned on the cold water, and held her hand under the stream. The shock of the chill made her shiver, but his voice was low and steady, almost soothing. Breathe slowly. It's all right. She looked down at her hand resting in his, the warmth of his palm against her skin both unfamiliar and safe. No one in the kitchen dared speak. The only sounds were the hiss of water and the pounding of her own heartbeat. When the burn began to fade, Nathan gently patted her hand dry with a paper towel, then opened a cabinet and retrieved a small first aid kit. I always keep one here, he said with a quiet grin. Cooking can be a dangerous sport. He applied a thin layer of ointment, his touch careful and deliberate, as though he were handling something fragile. From this close, Emily could see a faint scar curving along his left cheek, something she had never noticed before. You've been burned before? She asked softly. He nodded, still focused on her hand. When I was 16, I tried to cook for my mother and turned the flame too high. Burned my entire left arm. She just laughed and said at least the meal was made with love. Our difference. The story made her chest tighten. There was something in his voice, not pain, but longing. When he finished wrapping her hand, their eyes met, and for a heartbeat neither of them spoke. She could smell the faint scent of sandalwood on his skin, hear the calm rhythm of his breathing in the quiet space between them. Nathan was the first to break the moment. His tone was soft but firm. Next time, let me handle that. I'm used to getting burned. Our difference. A faint smile touched her lips. If you do everything, I'll never learn. To have an all time. He looked at her with a mix of surrender and admiration. You're stubborn. To have an all time. I just don't want to be seen as weak, she said, her voice gentle but sure. I've spent my whole life standing up every time someone tried to push me down. To have an all time. He didn't answer, but his eyes spoke for him, filled with an understanding words couldn't capture. Then he said quietly, almost like a promise, from now on, you don't have to do that alone. Everyport. That afternoon, when the others had gone home, Emily looked at the bandage on her hand, tracing its cool edge with a smile. She didn't quite understand why the burn made her feel warm inside. Perhaps because, for the first time in a long while, someone had cared not out of duty, but out of heart. Meanwhile, upstairs in his office, Nathan stood by the window, watching her step out into the golden haze of evening, her hair catching the wind. His hand still remembered the feel of her skin, and inside him, when we went to the frame, a quiet flame had begun to burn. Not fierce, like the past, but gentle, the kind of light that makes a man want to stay. Just a little longer. Simply to know he is still capable of feeling alive. 2 weeks later, Emily Carter stepped out of the black SUV parked in front of O'Hare Airport, pulling a small suitcase behind her. Nathan Morello was already waiting outside the International Departures Terminal, dressed in a white shirt beneath a long gray coat, dark sunglasses shielding his eyes. His demeanor calm yet unreadable. He tilted his head in greeting, a faint smile crossing his face like a quiet reassurance. Ready for your first trip as Verona House's consultant? Emily pressed her lips together, trying to hide her nervousness. I still can't believe I'm flying to Italy. I've never been outside the U.S. before. Nathan nodded slightly, his voice lowering as if he were recalling a distant memory. Siena was where I first learned that not every great meal needs expensive ingredients. Some things only need sincerity. Today-wise, the line made her smile softly, easing the rush of anxiety that always came with airports. On the plane, when the seatbelt light dimmed, Nathan opened his laptop to review reports while Emily gazed out the window, watching the vast ocean stretch endlessly below. Amid the steady hum of the engines, her thoughts wandered to the moment his hand had wrapped around hers when he bandaged her burn, the way he said she didn't have to be alone anymore. That memory, fragile yet warm, returned to her whenever she closed her eyes. When the plane landed in Florence, morning light bathed Italy in soft gold. They continued by car to Siena, the road winding through olive groves and vineyards spread across rolling hills. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching red-tiled rooftops shimmer through a veil of mist. Nathan drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his knee. It wasn't an awkward silence, but one that felt natural, steady, unspoken. When they reached the heart of Siena, the air was filled with the scent of coffee, toasted bread, and the distant toll of church bells. Nathan led her to a small restaurant tucked away in an old alley, where his old friend Marco, a warm-faced Italian chef in his 50s, was already waiting. "You really can't live without a kitchen, can you?" Marco laughed, pulling Nathan into an embrace. They spoke in Italian, the easy rhythm of two men who had shared a lifetime of stories. Nathan introduced Emily, explaining that she was the one who had helped him bring Verona House back to life. Marco shook her hand with genuine warmth. "If Nathan trusts you, then you must be someone special." Emily blushed, unsure how to respond. Throughout lunch, Nathan let her taste Tuscany's signature dishes, pici al tartufo, homemade pasta rich with truffle, and a glass of Chianti wine that glowed ruby in the afternoon light. He told her about his childhood visits to Italy, when his mother had brought him here to escape his father's world. She used to say that if you want to understand people, watch how they eat. Happy people always eat slowly, he said, gazing out the window where sunlight gilded the cobblestone streets. Emily listened quietly, feeling a mix of admiration and closeness rise within her. For the first time, she wasn't seeing him as the poised businessman who carried his father's shadow, but as a man who had once been lost, still searching for a peace he'd been denied too long. That evening, they walked through Piazza del Campo, the square glowing under rows of lanterns. Music drifted softly from a nearby cafe, blending with the murmured laughter of strangers. When they stopped near the old fountain, a gentle breeze swept through the air, and Nathan said quietly, "Thank you for not walking away from my world, everyone." Emily's heart tightened. "I don't think I'm in your world," she replied. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Everyone," he smiled, but it was a smile laced with sadness. "Maybe, but whether you realize it or not, your presence makes that world a lot less dark." It said. His words left her speechless. The wind stirred her hair, and though he didn't touch her, he stood close enough for his warmth to reach her. Together, they looked up at the Italian night sky, vast and full of stars, and in that still moment, Emily understood something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet pulse of two hearts learning, little by little, how to believe in something beautiful again. That afternoon, the Tuscan sky was awash in amber. The sun sank slowly behind the olive-covered hills, painting the horizon in ribbons of gold and orange. Nathan Morello and Emily Carter were in the countryside outside Siena, where Marco had invited them to visit his family's small vineyard. They walked along a gravel path lined with rows of heavy grapevines, the air rich with the scent of dry grass and warm earth. Nathan walked a few steps ahead, speaking about how he wanted to bring this grape variety back to the U.S. first, to create Verona House's own line of wine. Emily listened, smiling faintly, noticing how the fading light brushed over his hair, softening everything around them into a living painting. When they stopped amid a grove of ancient olive trees, Nathan set down the wicker basket he carried, poured 2 glasses of red wine, and handed one to her. "I once promised my mother," he said slowly, his voice roughened by the wind, "that I would only reopen Verona House when I found someone who could bring it back to life, not with money, but with soul. It's Canade." Emily looked at him, the sunset reflecting in his gray eyes, making them gleam with a light she hadn't seen before. "And you think I'm that person?" she asked quietly. Nathan didn't answer right away. He took a sip of wine, then said, "I don't know. But ever since you walked in, I haven't seen Verona House as a project anymore. It's become something else, a way to mend things, to believe that people can start over." "It is not a got." She fell silent, her heart beating faster. The amber light spread softly over everything, blurring the line between distance and closeness. A breeze swept past, lifting a few strands of hair from her forehead. Nathan reached up instinctively, brushing them gently behind her ear, his hand lingering for a moment hesitant, almost afraid of its own movement. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze. No words were spoken. The silence between them carried more meaning than speech ever could. She could feel his breath, the faint scent of wine and wood on him. The world seemed to shrink until there was nothing left but the wind and the pounding rhythm of her heart. When Nathan leaned in, the space between them dissolved. The kiss came softly, like an exhale, not rushed, not possessive, but a quiet acknowledgement between two souls who had both been guarded for far too long. In that instant, Emily felt her fears and old shadows begin to fade. Nathan's hand tightened gently around hers as the last light of day wrapped around them, bearing silent witness to two wounded people finding faith again in each other. When they finally drew apart, Emily smiled faintly, her voice trembling. "We just crossed a professional line." Nathan laughed, the rare kind of laugh that made him look younger, almost unburdened. Maybe. But sometimes, boundaries are just things people build because they're afraid of what's real. 18s, she looked at him, her eyes uncertain yet tender. "Aren't you afraid?" he answered softly, his voice like wind through the olive leaves. "I've lived my whole life afraid. Now, there's only one thing that scares me, losing the person who made me believe kindness still exists." 18s, Emily lowered her gaze, afraid that if she looked at him any longer, her heart would never find its way back. The sun had slipped completely beyond the hills, leaving behind a lavender glow that stretched across the fields. They sat down beneath an ancient olive tree, its leaves whispering in the evening wind, and watched the first stars appear in the Italian sky. Nathan set his glass aside and said quietly, "If there's a next life, I hope my mother can see this moment." "It's Reedy," said. Emily looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe she already can. Maybe she sees that her son has finally found peace. Trees. In that space, words became unnecessary. Only the lingering light of dusk and the warmth between them remained fragile yet infinite. And as the wind drifted through the olive branches, Emily knew that even when she returned to Chicago, no matter what awaited them, this moment would stay with her the evening when, for the first time in years, her heart dared to beat for someone else. The next morning, their flight from Florence touched down in Chicago beneath a thin veil of early winter snow. Emily Carter sat quietly in the car, watching through the fogged window as the city came into view: tall buildings, hurried crowds, the blare of car horns. Everything seemed to pull her back into reality after the impossibly peaceful days in Siena. Beside her, Nathan Morello scrolled through his work schedule, the light from the tablet reflected against his cheek, bringing back the familiar look of restraint and focus. She realized that the man who had once told stories about his grandmother beneath the Tuscan sunset now wore the expression of someone who had long since learned to hide what he felt. When the car stopped in front of Verona House, the new sign shimmered under the pale morning light. Workers were mounting a second line beneath it, "Taste of Dignity." Emily stepped out, drawing a deep breath. She could still smell traces of Italian wine and wind in her hair, but Chicago carried a different scent, one of reality, of challenge, of unfinished things. Nathan turned toward her, his voice low and steady. "Thank you for the trip. I didn't think I could ever return there and feel at peace." She smiled faintly, her gaze resting on the light dusting of snow on his shoulder. "I didn't think I'd miss Italy this much." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded slightly, that familiar gesture of a man accustomed to keeping his words inside. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the rhythm of reopening. Old and new staff moved around, setting tables, polishing glasses, adjusting lights. Emily tied on her apron and slipped easily into the flow of work, as though she had never left. Yet every time she passed Nathan, her heart tightened a little, as if something between them still lingered, undefined. By late afternoon, the management meeting convened upstairs. Nathan outlined plans for expanding the brand while Emily took notes, occasionally offering thoughts about customer experience. When the meeting ended and everyone filed out, only the two of them remained. Sunlight poured through the window, washing the room in the same soft amber that had filled the air in Siena. Nathan leaned against the desk, silent for a while, then asked quietly, "Do you think we made a mistake?" Emily paused mid-sentence, pen frozen. "If you mean that kiss," He nodded. His gaze turned toward the window. I don't regret it. I just don't want it to make things harder for you. It's Sonnery. She set the pen down. Her voice calm, though it trembled faintly. There's nothing hard about it. I just don't want it to overshadow what we're building here. It's Sonnery. He turned to face her. In his gray eyes was something she couldn't name admiration. Maybe. Or a quiet H. You're always so strong. Quoted. I have to be, she said with a small, tired smile. Otherwise I would have fallen apart a long time ago. Quoted. Silence settled again. The clock ticked steadily. Outside. Snow began to fall in slow spirals. Nathan moved closer, stopping just before her desk. His tone was warm, firm, and unmistakably sincere. I promise you, everything between us will stay clear. I don't want you to be seen differently, not by our staff, not by the press. I'll protect you. The way I wish someone had protected my mother. Is not, the words caught in her throat not because she was overwhelmed, but because she knew he meant every one of them. The man standing before her wasn't speaking from pity. He understood, with painful clarity, the worth of someone who had once had to rise from humiliation. When Emily stepped out of the office, the Chicago sky was thick with white mist. The lights from Verona House spilled softly through the windows, golden and calm. She stopped for a moment, looking up at the sign. Behind her, Nathan still stood inside, watching silently. In that instant, both of them knew no matter how much they tried to keep things professional, what lay between them had already slipped beyond their control. It was no longer gratitude, nor simple respect. It was something deeper, quieter, a flame smoldering beneath the ash, waiting for the faintest breath of wind to spark it back to life. 1 week after their return, the city lay wrapped in cold mist, and the yellow lights shimmered on the wet streets as Emily Carter was on her way to Verona House when her phone rang. And the voice on the other end was frantic. Ms. Emily. The restaurant. Something's happened. Fire. Smoke. We called the fire department. She went numb for a heartbeat, then ran, her heart hammering so hard it felt like she might not catch her breath. And when her car pulled up, she could hardly believe the sight. Verona House shrouded in smoke. Firefighters fighting embers that still leapt from the back kitchen. Staff clustered at the curb, many of them weeping, some coughing from the smoke. And she pushed through the crowd, calling his name until she saw him emerge from inside. His shirt streaked with soot, hair disordered, face set in a stern line within the gray haze, and she breathed out in relief, seizing his hand with a slight tremor. Are you all right? Nathan only nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. And then he said, Luckily no one is badly hurt, but this was not an accident. Which froze her. What do you mean? She asked, and he glanced toward the storage area where the fire had begun. The electrical system was checked just last week. It couldn't have started by itself. Someone set it on fire. A cold shiver ran down her spine when she looked at that place. And as police began to cordon off the scene, Nathan grew quiet, his eyes darkening as if a ghost from the past had come into sight. And they sat in the car for several hours after the blaze was put out, silent, staring at his hands still smudged with ash, until finally he spoke in a hoarse voice thick with smoke and fatigue. I know who did this. Emily turned to him with alarm. Who? Anthony Russo. The name landed like a blade, tearing the fragile calm they had built. She remembered him half hearing the name before a former rival of the Morello family who had moved into restaurant investments. And she asked, Are you sure? Nathan nodded slowly. Russo said I would pay for daring to cleanse the Morello name through legal means. He lost many contracts when Verona House reopened. I hit his pride. He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes, voice dropping to a whisper. I have tried to leave the darkness, Emily, but it seems the darkness never leaves me. She looked at him, her chest tightening, and even with ash on his face she saw clearly his eyes not full of fear, but heavy with the exhaustion of a man who has spent his life between lines of right and wrong. And she said softly, You are not the man you used to be. You are not them. He opened his eyes and looked at her a long time. Maybe, but they still treat me as if I am. And if I do nothing now, they'll burn again not only the restaurant, but the people inside it. Emily gripped his hand with resolve, voice steady. Then we fight together, not with violence, but with truth. I've seen Verona House rebuilt. I will not let it fall because of your past. Nathan let out a tired smile that hurt to hear. You always speak as if you believe the world is fair. No, she replied, meeting his gaze. I simply believe that if no one begins with kindness, then no one else will. Outside, smoke still rose from blackened bricks. The flashing lights of the fire engines threw shifting pools of illumination across their faces like the chiaroscuro of Nathan's life. And in that moment, Emily understood this was not merely arson, but the opening of a battle, not fought with guns or blood, but with honor, memory, and truth, a fight they would have to face, even if it meant risking the fragile thing they had just found on a quiet Tuscan evening. In the days following the fire, the air around Verona House grew heavy. The walls were still stained black, the scent of smoke clinging to the corridors, no matter how many times they had been cleaned. Emily Carter sat in a small meeting room. A stack of financial documents and insurance reports spread out before her. Nathan Morello entered with a face carved from stone. He had just returned from a meeting with the attorneys. They won't cover the full claim, he said hoarsely. They're suggesting it was an intentional act from within. Arlie Free. Emily looked up, startled. You mean they're accusing us? Nathan gave a slight nod. Someone staged this to make it look like I was behind it. He sat across from her, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. Russo doesn't just want to destroy property. He wants to destroy my name. Arlie Free. Emily said nothing for a moment, feeling the suppressed anger in his voice. Then she spoke softly. We can fight back legally. If he uses the media, we'll use the media. Nathan's gaze softened slightly. You're starting to think like someone on the inside. That's because I am, she said firmly. Since joining Verona House, she was no longer the timid waitress from the old wine bar. She understood now that she stood in the middle of a war for dignity, where silence meant surrender. They began gathering evidence, security footage, 2 invoices, employee records, even strange emails that had arrived in the company inbox in recent weeks. Nathan worked with his private attorney, an older man who had once been a friend of his father but had chosen a lawful path. Emily oversaw the communications team, rewriting the entire press statement. We won't speak in apology, she told the group. We'll speak of rebirth, how Verona House was built not just with money, but with trust. That's something no one can take away. The room fell silent. Then Nathan nodded slowly, deliberately. You're right. Don't nine. In the days that followed, he worked without rest. His phone never silent. He spoke with investors, in journalists, police. The city lights reflected through the glass each night, painting his face, the face of a man waging a battle no one could fully see. Sometimes Emily found him standing alone in the kitchen, a glass of wine in his hand, staring into the void. What are you afraid of? She asked. Nathan didn't turn around. Of becoming him. The more I fight the darkness, the closer I feel to it. She stepped nearer, her voice quiet but firm. No one becomes their enemy just because they fight. You're not using violence. You're using reason. That's the difference. It's did not read it, Ed. He turned then, the gray in his eyes trembling between pride and fear. Do you trust me, Emily? If I didn't, I would have left the night of the fire. The words silenced him for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly, as if he had just found something to hold on to in the storm. When the court opened its preliminary hearing, Nathan appeared in a dark gray suit, composed in a way that felt almost unnatural. Emily sat in the back row, her chest tight as she spotted Anthony Russo across the room, his faint smile laced with provocation. Cameras flashed. The press whispered. When the opposing lawyer began his attack, implying that Nathan had used illicit funds to rebuild his brand, Nathan stayed calm, speaking only when necessary, each word measured and cold. When the session ended, he stepped out of the courtroom, the top button of his shirt undone, looking as though he had just walked out of a trench. Emily approached quietly. Are you all right? He looked at her, the hint of a weary smile crossing his face. But his eyes were brighter than ever, far from over. He said, "But at least this time, I'm not fighting alone. You." She gave his hand a brief squeeze, saying nothing. Above Chicago, the smoke from distant factories drifted into the sky like remnants of an old war that had never truly ended, and in Nathan's eyes, she saw the light of a man who had chosen to confront rather than flee, not with guns, not with power, but with the quiet strength of endurance. The kind of strength only those who have known darkness can ever truly understand. 3 months after the fire, Verona House opened its doors again. That night, Chicago glittered beneath the city lights, white ribbons tied along the balcony rails, red roses spilling across every table, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifting through the air. Emily Carter stood before the mirror in the back room, dressed in a sleek black gown, her hair pulled into a high bun, a woman utterly transformed from the trembling waitress who once carried trays of wine with shaking hands. She looked at her reflection, smiled faintly, then stepped out, downstairs. Nathan Morello stood on a small platform, shaking hands with investors and journalists. His black suit fit perfectly, his deep, steady voice rising above the jazz music. "Tonight," he said, "Verona House is not just a restaurant. It is proof that trust can rise again from ashes. It's all again." The room erupted in applause. Camera flashes flickered like sparks. Emily stood at the back, watching him, seeing in him a steadiness she had never seen before. Nathan was no longer the man haunted by the past, but one who had turned his pain into purpose. When his gaze met hers across the crowd, a single, quiet nod passed between them, a wordless acknowledgement that they had walked through the storm and were still standing. Guests sampled the new menu she and the team had created, smoked salmon with lemon for starters, and the signature cacio e pepe Nathan had cooked for her on that late night long ago. Compliments flowed. A few guests even grew emotional when Emily gave her short speech. "Verona House was rebuilt not to prove anything," she said, "but to remind us that people can change and that kindness, when planted in the right soil, will grow even from scorched ground." End quote. The room fell silent for a moment before applause swelled again. Nathan looked at her, pride glinting in his eyes, but beneath it, something deeper, more private. The piece didn't last long. As the evening drew to a close, Emily was directing the servers when a chill ran down her spine. She looked up and saw Anthony Russo step through the door. His tailored suit gleamed under the lights. His half-smile, arrogant and venomous, he walked toward the bar as if the celebration were his own. Nathan saw him too. Neither spoke, but the air tightened like a drawn string. Russo raised his glass, his voice slicing through the music. "Well, Morello," he said, "touching, really seeing you rise so quickly. Perhaps arson is the finest form of marketing. It's not now that—" A few reporters turned their heads, cameras already raised. Emily stepped forward, her tone sharp as glass. "Mr. Russo, tonight isn't for insults. This is a place of respect. It's not now that—" He chuckled smooth. "And serpentin. Respect? From a waitress who was once fired for spilling wine? The world does have a way of handing out miracles. It's not now that—" Nathan stepped up beside her. His gaze was cold steel, his voice low but carrying. She stood back up on her own. "What about you? Did you have to burn down a city to feel seen?" Silence fell over the room. Russo's jaw tightened, fury flashing briefly in his eyes before he forced a smile. "We'll meet again. Morello, I've never lost on my own turf." Desiled, he set his glass down and walked out, leaving behind the heavy scent of cologne and a hollow chill in his wake. Nathan stood still for a few seconds, then turned to Emily and murmured, "He didn't come to ruin the night. He came to warn us." Then we won't be afraid," she replied, her voice calm but unyielding. He looked at her wariness in his face, but admiration glowing beneath it. Outside, winter winds whipped against the glass, sending the white ribbons fluttering loose. Inside, under the warm lights, surrounded by laughter and music, Nathan and Emily stood side by side, silent, united. They both knew this night was not just a reopening, it was the beginning of another confrontation. One where light would have to cut through the darkness once more to prove that the real flame could never be extinguished. 2 days after the reopening, Chicago lay under a thick veil of fog, its streets strangely still. Inside the Verona House office, dim light fell over a whiteboard filled with notes, arrows, and tangled diagrams. Emily Carter stood by the desk, watching Nathan Morello write the final lines on a thick folder. "Everything's ready," he said, his tone calm to the point of menace. "Russo thinks he's the one setting the trap, but in truth, he's already walked into his own." "Number 7. Emily stepped closer, her eyes serious. "Are you sure the evidence is strong enough?" Nathan nodded. He wasn't careful. When he set fire to Verona House, he hired a transport company that's already under investigation for money laundering. I sent that information to the FBI. They've been watching him for over a month. Tonight, they'll move. To anyway. She looked at him, admiration and unease tangled in her chest. "You planned this from the beginning?" He didn't look up from the folder. "From the night of the fire, I knew he wouldn't stop. I needed him to believe I was still reacting, not acting. What I learned from my father is this sometimes. To defeat a devil, you have to let him think he's winning." Emily fell silent. Inside her, awe warred with fear. He could be so cold, so precise, and yet that same control was what had kept him alive in a world where every decision carried a price. That evening, Verona House opened as usual. The dining room buzzed with life. The kitchen moved in rhythm, the scent of rosemary and butter floating through the air. No one knew that. Just 2 blocks away, several unmarked black cars sat parked, plainclothes agents waiting for a signal. Emily stood behind the bar, trying to steady her breathing when Russo walked in. He came alone, smug and polished, and took a seat by the window, the very table where Nathan had once stood up for her on that fateful night. Nathan appeared minutes later, holding a glass of wine, a calm smile playing at his lips. "I assume you're here to celebrate?" Russo looked up, contempt flashing in his eyes. "No. I came to remind you this game isn't over. You can buy the press, buy the lawyers, but you'll never wash the name Morello clean." "Arturisi." Nathan sat opposite him, voice low and steady. "You're wrong. I'm not trying to wash it. I'm trying to use it differently." "Arturisi." Russo gave a slow, mocking grin. "Turning a mafia legacy into a humanitarian brand? Clever. But you're still just a son of sin, eh?" Nathan tilted his head, his gaze turning to steel. "Maybe. But at least I don't burn down other people's restaurants out of envy. Eh?" Russo's laugh was short, brittle, and it died the moment Nathan set his phone on the table. The screen lit up. A recording played, his own voice unmistakable. "Make sure the fire starts from the storage room. I don't want anyone walking out if they're on the night shift." "Eh?" Russo's face drained of color. He moved to stand. But the restaurant doors burst open. 2 FBI agents stepped in, flashing badges. "Anthony Russo," one said. "You're under arrest for arson, endangering civilian lives, and interstate money laundering." "It's not a dude." The entire dining room froze. Ed Russo struggled, shouting protests, but Nathan remained seated, silent, eyes calm as still water. As the agents led him past, Russo turned, teeth bared. "You think you've won? Morello, you've just become a more polished version of your father and Fowler's." Nathan said nothing, his jaw tightening as Russo was dragged out into the fog. From across the room, Emily saw his hand gripping the wineglass so hard his knuckles went white. When the chaos settled, she approached, her voice soft. "You did the right thing. You didn't take revenge. You protected what was worth protecting." And found. He didn't look at her, eyes fixed on the doorway. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I've just killed the last piece of who I used to be." "Tends to Jews." She laid a gentle hand over his, your gaze steady, tender. "You didn't kill it. You just stopped letting it rule you. Tends to Jews. Nathan turned to her then. Fatigue etched deep in his face but in his eyes. A faint, fragile light. If it weren't for you, I might not have stopped in time. Tends to Jews. Outside. Snow began to fall. Soft flakes covering what little blackened ruin the city still bore. Inside Verona House. Jazz played again, low and warm, threading through the mellow light that shimmered on the tables. Emily knew that though this battle was over, the scars inside Nathan would remain. But at least, this time, he was no longer standing in the dark alone. That night, Verona House closed early. The snowstorm had passed, leaving behind a city wrapped in silence. Emily Carter stood in the kitchen, watching the small flame of a half-burned candle flicker on the table. Wisps of smoke curled upward, slowing time itself. Nathan Morello stepped in, his coat still dusted with snow. For a long while, he said nothing. Then quietly, I just came back from the FBI office. Russo confessed. He'll be facing many years in prison. It's not of God. Emily nodded, her eyes calm yet deep. Then it's over. It's not of God. He looked at her, the gray in his eyes restless, unsettled. No, Emily. For me, it's just beginning. It's not of God. He moved closer. Sitting across from her, the candlelight fell across his face, tracing the hard, weary lines of a man who had carried too much. I used to believe that staying away from my father's shadow would make me different, he said. But today, watching Russo in handcuffs, I trembled. Not out of pity, out of fear. Because in his eyes, I saw something I recognized. A piece of myself I've spent years denying. End quote. Emily stayed silent. Listening, every word seemed heavier than air. You chose differently, she said softly. You didn't let hatred decide what you'd do. It's Saldabita. Nathan gave a faint, bitter smile. Do you know what the cruelest part is? I defeated Russo using the very lessons I learned from my father, how to gather evidence. Set a trap. Make the enemy step into it on his own. My mother used to say I was more like him than I wanted to admit. And now, maybe she was right. It's Saldabita. Emily rose. Stepping toward him, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Nathan, you're not him, she said gently. You took what once caused harm and turned it into protection. That's the difference between cruelty and courage. To his rest passes, he looked up at her, his eyes holding gratitude, guilt, and something else, something he'd never dared to name. I don't know what kept me from falling deeper into the dark, he murmured. But maybe it was you. To his rest passes, Emily trembled. Her heart raced as if each beat were an answer she couldn't yet speak aloud. I only did what anyone who cares for you would do, she whispered. But Nathan shook his head. No. No one's ever looked at me the way you do. No one's ever believed I could be good, not even me. Inespirited, he stood, and the space between them vanished to a breath. The air in the kitchen thickened, filled only by the faint hiss of wind against the window and the soft crackle of the candle. Emily met his gaze, her voice trembling. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You already have. Nathan stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek, hesitant, but filled with all the words he couldn't say. I'm not afraid of judgment anymore, he whispered. I'm only afraid of losing the one person who makes me believe I can still be forgiven. A tear rolled down Emily's cheek, not of weakness, but of everything they had endured converging into this quiet moment. She took his hand, pressing it gently. You've already been forgiven. Nathan, not by me, by the better part of yourself you chose to keep. Are free. He leaned down, and their kiss came slow and tender, not born of desire, but of release. The candle before them wavered, its light trembling against the wall, where two shadows merged into one, no words left. Only warmth and breath in unison. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the last traces of the fire that once scarred the building, and in Emily's heart, she knew every wound could heal. If someone dared to touch it without fear of being burned, that night, in that kitchen, between the faint scent of smoke and the fragile light of a single flame. She knew at last that both of them had found what they had never dared to name: peace. 1 year after that night, Chicago welcomed its first spring without early snow. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows of Verona House, now reborn under a new name: Taste of Fire. The words had been chosen by Nathan Morello himself, inspired by something Emily Carter once said, a sentence that had never left him. Fire can burn, but it can also forge. I was action. She stood by the doorway, dressed in the new uniform, a deep wine-red shade that matched the restaurant's new logo. Her eyes following the staff as they arranged flowers and polished silver. Light glinted off the thin silver ring on her fourth finger. Nathan walked over, a folded morning paper in his hand, a faint smile brushing his lips. The press is calling this a symbol of rebirth in the heart of Chicago, he said, placing the newspaper on the counter. But all I see is a place that reminds people that sometimes pain has its own sweetness. Is important. Emily smiled, her gaze soft yet radiant with quiet pride. Taste of Fire isn't just a restaurant, Nathan. It's your story, our story. But she stepped closer, straightening his collar gently. Do you remember the first day I came here? I was a waitress, humiliated in front of everyone. And you were a man running from his own name. But Nathan chuckled, his voice low and warm like aged wine. And now you're running the entire Taste of Fire network across 3 states. Meanwhile, I'm still trying to figure out how to cook eggs without burning them. It's not with Mr. Day. She laughed, a bright, honest sound that filled the sunlit air like a note of music. From outside came the sound of footsteps, the young interns arriving for their shift, faces fresh with excitement and hope. Emily watched them, her heart swelling with warmth. Many of them had once been unemployed, rejected, convinced they had no more chances left. Now they worked in a place praised not only for its cuisine, but for its philosophy. We don't rebuild reputations. We rebuild people. When the press arrived to film a feature segment, Emily stood before the camera. Her voice was calm, deliberate, every word drawn from lived experience. Taste of Fire doesn't teach people to cook for success, she said, but to rediscover themselves. The kitchen isn't just a place where meals are made, it's where people are healed. Through every burn, every drop of sweat. In quote, the audience outside applauded. From a distance, Nathan watched, his eyes softening, a quiet pride curving his lips. He no longer felt the need to hide the name Morello. He had learned to make it a legacy not of sin, but of redemption. That evening, when the restaurant closed, Nathan and Emily sat together at the last table, the sunset slanting through the glass. On the table were 2 glasses of red wine, fragrant with a trace of smoke. I still remember the cacio e pepe from that first night, she said quietly. It tasted like a beginning. I was Aya. Nathan took a sip of wine, his gaze drifting to the slow traffic outside. And this glass, he replied, tastes like something that's passed but never really gone. I was Ayan's eye. Emily said nothing for a while. Then she placed her hand over his. You know, she murmured, I used to think fire could only hurt, but now I know it can also keep you warm, if you know how to hold it. I was not too capturada. Nathan looked at her, his fingers closing around hers slowly, firmly. You taught me that. Emily, end quote. Outside, the sun dipped behind the skyline, and the last light of day touched the Taste of Fire sign, reflecting a faint glow like a flame that refused to die. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, This fire, it finally became light, as Ma, and in that moment, they sat in silence, listening to their hearts sync with the rhythm of the city, a wordless symphony of healing, where fire no longer burned, but lingered instead as the gentle warmth of trust, compassion, and a love found amid the ashes. On an early summer morning, sunlight streamed diagonally through the wide glass panes of Verona House, now known as Taste of Fire. The air inside was quiet, rich with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Emily Carter adjusted the collar of her white shirt, standing before the mirror in the waiting room, taking a deep breath. Today was her first live television interview since Taste of Fire had been awarded Social Recovery Enterprise of the Year. In Twells, Nathan Morello entered, holding a cup of black coffee, a soft smile curving his lips. "Ready?" he asked. His tone light but warm. She turned to him and smiled. "I prepared all night," she said. "But I'm still a little nervous." Nathan handed her the cup, his eyes gentle. "Don't think of it as an interview. Just think of it as telling our story." His words made her smile again, calm, but touched with emotion. When the cameras turned on, the host greeted the viewers and faced her. "Ms. Emily Carter. Many say that Taste of Fire isn't just a restaurant, it's a miracle in the heart of Chicago. Could you tell us what inspired its unique philosophy?" Emily sat up straight, her voice soft but firm. "We didn't build this restaurant to impress anyone. We built it to heal. Here, we don't rebuild reputations, we rebuild people." "He really did." The host tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Rebuild people? Could you explain what that means?" Emily smiled, her eyes shining with quiet conviction. "Many who come to Taste of Fire aren't looking to start a career, they're looking to start over. I was once one of them. I know what it feels like to be looked down upon, to be treated as if you don't deserve respect. But someone believed in me when the world turned its back, and that belief changed everything." And in Afraid. As she spoke, Nathan stood in the distance, leaning against a wooden pillar, silent, watching. No one knew that he was the man she spoke of, the one who had once stood up for a humiliated waitress before a room full of strangers. The host continued, voice soft but full of admiration. "I've heard that you came up with the name Taste of Fire yourself. What does it mean?" Emily glanced toward the window, where sunlight reflected off the silver sign outside. "Fire can destroy, but it can also warm. It's a symbol of pain and rebirth. To me, every person can be a flame, even if it's been extinguished. It can burn again. If someone believes," the studio fell silent for a few moments. Then the host smiled and nodded. "What a beautiful thought. You've shown that kindness can vanish into darkness, but it never truly dies." Quote, when the program ended and the crew packed up, Emily remained standing alone in the room. Nathan approached, wearing a rare smile, not bright, but quiet and real. "You just made all of Chicago stop for a few minutes to listen," he said softly. "You spoke for me, for my mother, and for everyone who ever thought they didn't deserve a second chance." Quote, Emily turned to him, to her eyes glimmering. "I just said what I believe." "Asko." Nathan was silent for a moment, then replied gently, "And that's exactly why I believe in you." Asko. Outside, the streets of Chicago bustled with life. A few passers-by paused in front of the restaurant, reading the words etched beneath its sign, "We don't rebuild reputations. We rebuild people." Through the window, Emily watched them, a slow smile spreading across her face. She knew that in a world where trust was often fragile, they had built something rare, a place where people were seen, forgiven, and given a chance to begin again. And there, the fire within them no longer burned out of anger, but out of love, a steady flame born of faith, showing that even the most broken hearts can still glow like embers, warm and bright, long after the fire itself has passed. That night, after the interview aired, Taste of Fire was busier than ever. The whole city seemed to flock there, wanting to breathe the air of a story that had just spread across America. Emily Carter was directing the kitchen staff when Nathan Morello walked in, phone in hand. He had just received hundreds of messages, congratulations, partnership offers, and thank you emails from people who had once made mistakes and now longed for a second chance. "We did it," he said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Taste of Fire isn't just a restaurant anymore, Emily. It's become a symbol." "Isri." She turned to him, her smile lighting her face more brightly than the kitchen lamps. "I just hope people understand that not every miracle begins with light," she said softly. "Sometimes it begins with fire." "Isri." Nathan nodded, but something flickered in his eyes, a faint, uneasy intuition. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 10. "I'll go down to the storeroom to check the inventory," he said. She nodded. Turning back to the stoves, the kitchen hummed with rhythm, the sound of knives against cutting boards, the sizzle of oil, the fragrance of tomato and basil in the air. No one noticed the back door creak open. A cold gust sweeping through. A tall figure stepped inside, face half covered by a dark coat. When Emily turned, she froze. Kyle Mercer, the former manager of Verona House, the man who once dragged her by the hair in front of 50 diners, stood there, holding a gun. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild, the stench of alcohol heavy in the air. "Seems you're enjoying your perfect little life." "Huh?" he rasped, voice shaking. "While I lost everything, my job, my reputation, all because of you." Interpeated. The kitchen fell silent, save for the faint crackle of frying oil. Emily took a slow step back, gripping the edge of the steel counter, forcing herself to stay calm. "Kyle, you're drunk," she said softly. "Put the gun down. We can talk, if you won't sprite it." He let out a bitter laugh, broken, hollow. "Talk? After you got me blacklisted from the industry? After the papers turned me into a monster?" She drew a breath, steadying her voice against the rising tide of fear. "I didn't destroy you, Kyle. Your actions did. If you won't sprite it." His hand trembled as he raised the gun toward her. "You know," he said hoarsely, "sometimes I wish I hadn't let go of you that night. Maybe everything would have ended sooner. If you won't sprect." His voice cracked, rage and despair colliding. The back door burst open. Nathan appeared. His eyes took in the scene instantly. He stepped forward slowly, his tone eerily calm. "Kyle, put the gun down. You don't want to do this. Experience you." Kyle swung around, aiming at him. You took everything from me. My job. Her." Nathan's voice remained steady as he advanced, inch by inch. "No one took anything from you. You lost because you couldn't take responsibility. But it's not too late to stop. You can still choose not to destroy what's left of your life. Or Pirates now." Kyle laughed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You talk like you understand. You were a criminal too, weren't you, Morello? Or do you think you've washed that past clean?" Nathan didn't answer. He met Kyle's gaze not with hatred, but with something far more disarming. Compassion. "You're right," he said quietly. "I lost my way too. I let anger guide me, but someone taught me that forgiveness is the only real strength. If I can change, Kyle, then so can you." "It's not of a." The kitchen held its breath. Kyle blinked, his hands shaking violently now. Emily stepped forward, her voice low but unwavering. "Kyle, let it end here. Not with blood. With a choice. It's not a..." He looked at her, his eyes blurring, and then, suddenly, he dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor, the metallic sound slicing through the tension. Nathan lunged forward, kicking the weapon aside, then knelt to steady him. Kyle broke down, sobbing, his shoulders shaking. "I've got nothing left," he choked. Nathan's voice trembled as he answered. "You still have yourself, and that's the only beginning any of us ever get. Does not play." When the police arrived, Kyle went quietly. Emily stood frozen, her hands still trembling. Nathan approached, touching her cheek gently. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I am, but you, why didn't you fight back? He could have killed you." "It's not averficted." He gave a weary but warm smile. "Because I made a promise never to use violence again. Not out of weakness, but because it's the only way to keep what's human inside me. It's not averficted." Emily looked at him, her heart tightening. She understood this moment wasn't just a rescue. It was proof, final and undeniable, that Nathan Morello had truly changed. As the flashing red and blue lights from the police cars spilled through the windows, reflecting against the Taste of Fire sign, Emily knew. The flame within them, the one that had once burned, destroyed, consumed, had become something else now. A light that could save. 3 months after that night in the smoke-filled kitchen, Life had slowly returned to normal, but inside Emily Carter, everything had changed. She and Nathan Morello had left Chicago and moved to Napa Valley, where they began a new chapter, peaceful, slow, and closer to the earth. Their small house sat among rolling hills of green vineyards, with an old olive tree standing tall behind it, its wide branches casting a soft shade. Beneath that tree, Nathan had built a long wooden table, where they spent their mornings drinking coffee and listening to the wind sift through the leaves. Taste of Fire now had a new branch in San Francisco. Run by their former apprentices, Emily remained a mentor, but most of her days were devoted to teaching cooking classes to local youth, those who had once lost their way and were searching for a path back to themselves. "You know," she said one morning as she plucked the season's first olives, "every time I see someone smile while holding a kitchen knife, I see myself in them. They don't realize it, but just having someone believe in you, it can change everything." Out of this first, Nathan stood nearby, holding a wooden basket, his gaze on her soft and serene. "You've done what it took me half a lifetime to understand," he said slowly. "That redemption doesn't come from strength, but from faith." Out of this first, Emily looked up, smiling. "And you taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness." Out of this first, a gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of earth and sunlight. She rested a hand on her belly where new life was quietly growing. Nathan noticed the gesture and paused. "Are you tired?" he asked, his voice low but tender with concern. She shook her head, her smile radiant. "No, just amazed. Every day, I feel something growing inside me, not just the baby, but the certainty that we've truly left the past behind." It's still dated in finest. Nathan stepped closer, crouched down, and laid a hand over hers. "I once thought my life would end in darkness," he murmured. "But then you walked in, and everything began again." End quote. The sunset poured over her hair, turning it to gold, and in his eyes once shadowed by pain, there was only peace. They sat together beneath the olive tree, the last light of day spilling across the ground in broken patches, like fragments of old memories pieced back together. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, her voice a whisper half prayer, half wonder. "If one day our child asks how we met," she said softly, "what will you tell them?" Nathan chuckled, taking her hand in his. "I'll tell them their mother spilled wine on a difficult customer's suit, and instead of being ruined, she changed an entire world. It says," Emily laughed through her tears, "and if our child asks why you stood up for her that night," he gazed out toward the hills, his voice fading into the breeze, "because I couldn't stand to watch a good person be broken. But maybe I stood up not just to protect her, but to save myself." They sat in silence for a long time. In the distance, the sun sank behind the vineyards, leaving only a faint orange glow across the sky. Emily whispered, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, from fire to light, from darkness to dawn." The olive branches swayed softly, a few leaves drifting down around them, spinning through the golden air, and in that moment, Emily felt with absolute clarity that every pain, every loss, every scar in their lives had found its meaning beneath the old olive tree, where each gust of wind carried the scent of renewal. Two souls who had once been lost had finally found home, not in a place, but in each other's hearts. It was an autumn morning, with a thin veil of mist draped over the vineyard hills of Napa Valley. Emily Carter stood by the window, a cup of herbal tea in her hand, listening to the wind weave through the branches of the old olive tree at the corner of their garden. Outside, Nathan Morello was trimming the late-season vines, his movements calm, his presence quietly steady. The world seemed to have drifted far away from the chaos of their past. Yet sometimes, when sunlight touched the ground, she could still feel the faint warmth of old flames never fully extinguished, only glowing softly beneath the ashes. From the small kitchen, she heard Nathan's footsteps, then the sound of the door opening. He set a basket of grapes on the table and smiled. "The papers wrote about us again," he said gently. "They called Taste of Fire a story of rebirth, Deeded 40 to Tellery. Emily sat down and unfolded the newspaper. On the front page was their photograph beneath the olive tree, a man once branded a mafia heir, and a woman once humiliated in front of strangers. Now they were founders of a network of restaurants offering training to hundreds who had fallen and were trying to stand again. She laid the paper down and looked at him. Do you think fire can really change its color? He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Her fingers brushed the wooden table. Once, your fire was anger, and mine was fear. But now, it's what keeps us alive. Maybe fire doesn't only burn. Maybe it warms if we know how to hold it. Just did not read. Nathan sat beside her, his hand finding hers. Fire never dies, Emily. It just waits for someone to turn it into light. Distinct free, they sat quietly for a long while, listening to the soft chatter of birds on the eaves. In the distance, laughter rose from the cooking class. A young orphan boy, once taken in by taste of fire, was holding up the first pizza he had ever made. Emily watched, her eyes glistening. Do you remember the first day we met? She asked. I do, Nathan replied, his voice deep and warm. A glass of red wine, a girl humiliated, and a man who had sworn he'd never raise his hand again. Ad is really to need, she smiled. If I hadn't spilled that wine, maybe we'd have never met. Adoration, he chuckled softly. Sometimes the worst things are just the beginning of the best ones. In a port, on the table, her cup of tea still steamed, a gentle reminder that the fire of life isn't only meant to destroy, but also to warm the hearts once frozen by pain. As dusk descended, the last rays of sunlight filtered through the olive branches, bathing the room in a tender golden glow like a quiet blessing. Emily placed her hand on her belly, where the baby within stirred faintly, and whispered, The fire in you will be light, not shadow. It's not meant to get it. Nathan heard her and simply pulled her into his arms. There was nothing more to say. Every loss, every scar, every moment of despair or awakening, all had led them here, to this moment where the fire no longer threatened, but sustained. The story of Emily and Nathan is a reminder that no matter how cruel the world becomes, there is always a spark of light within us waiting to be kindled. Faith, compassion, and forgiveness. These are the forces that can turn even the fires of hell into the hearth of life. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If you believe that everyone carries their own taste of fire, a pain, a fall, but also the chance to rise stronger, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever met someone who changed your life with a single act of kindness? Tell us your story. You never know, it might become the spark that inspires someone else. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the YouTube channel Underworld Love Stories to discover more heartfelt, meaningful stories every day. Thank you for your time. May you have good health, a peaceful heart, and a life filled with light. See you in the next video, where together we'll keep exploring stories of healing that rise from the quiet depths of the human soul.